Let's be honest, every gardener has fallen for the promise of those glossy fertilizer bags. Instant growth, bigger blooms, greener leaves. They make it sound like your plants will leap out of the soil overnight. For years, I believed it too. I poured chemical fertilizers into my beds, thinking I was giving my garden the best. But after a few seasons, something felt wrong. My soil was drying out faster, earthworms had vanished, and my plants seemed addicted to constant feeding. The day I decided to stop using store-bought fertilizer was the day my garden came back to life. What I found was a simple, powerful DIY alternative, a living bio-boost that costs nothing and actually restores the natural cycles chemical fertilizers destroy. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes I'll show you exactly how it works, how you can make it at home, and why it's the single most important shift you can make for long-term soil health and real self-sufficiency. When I finally began looking deeper into what was happening under the surface, the truth was, well, honestly, quite alarming. Store-bought fertilizers are not plant food in the natural sense. They're chemical salts. They flood your soil with easily soluble nutrients, which plants absorb rapidly. Sounds great, right? Until you realize it's a short-term fix with devastating long-term consequences. Each dose creates an imbalance in your soil biology. The salts kill beneficial microbes, compact soil structure, and, reduce your soil's natural capacity to hold moisture. Over time, your garden becomes dependent on these chemical hits, needing more and more to achieve the same results, just like an addict chasing a high. Once the microbes die off, organic matter breaks down slower and your soil becomes, sterile. The living network that turns compost, decayed roots, and natural waste into plant-available nutrition gets wiped out. I noticed this the hard way. My once rich loam had turned to lifeless dust, and even though my plants looked good for a few weeks after each feed, they wilted faster than ever when the next rain washed those chemicals away. That's when I realized fertilizers weren't building fertility, they were borrowing it. When I stopped using fertilizers, I had to relearn what real soil health meant. Fertility doesn't come from a bag, it comes from life itself. Healthy soil is alive. It's full of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and, countless unseen workers constantly breaking down organic matter and cycling nutrients. These organisms are what make minerals available to plants in the first place. When you kill them off, you cut your plants off from their real source of strength. Once I started focusing on feeding the soil instead of the plants, everything changed. My first step was to introduce what I call the DIY Bio Boost, a fermented, microbe-rich liquid fertilizer that restores balance and rebuilds that living ecosystem. It's based on the same principles ancient farmers used for thousands of years before industrial agriculture even existed. They didn't rely on chemicals, they relied on biology, and that's exactly what we're going to bring back. This formula is built from things you already have lying around. I started with a simple mix of kitchen scraps, fruit peels, vegetable trimmings, and old rice or bread. These are full of carbohydrates and trace minerals that feed soil microbes. So I added some green waste from the yard. Things like grass clippings, fresh weeds, and just a bit of healthy garden soil, to introduce natural microbial cultures. Then I filled a large bucket with water, just enough to submerge everything, and stirred in a spoonful of molasses to act as a food source for the microbes. I covered the bucket with a loose cloth and, well, let it sit for about a week, giving it a good stir once a day. Within days, the brew started bubbling and releasing a warm, earthy smell. That's the sign that microbial fermentation was in full swing. What you're doing during this process is cultivating an explosion of beneficial bacteria, fungi, and enzymes. They're breaking down the organic material into forms plants can actually use, while multiplying into billions. When the fermentation finished, I strained the liquid and stored it in old bottles. That became my new fertilizer, the DIY BioBoost. To use it, I simply diluted 1 part of this liquid to 10 parts water and applied it directly to the base of my plants every 1 to 2 weeks. The effect was nothing short of shocking. My soil, which had been hard and crumbly, became dark and moist again. Earthworms returned, and roots spread deeper. The plants stopped depending on me for feeding because their ecosystem had recovered. The transformation isn't magic, it's biology. When you apply the BioBoost, you're reintroducing the microbial workforce that chemical fertilizers destroy. These organisms coat the roots of your plants, creating a living biofilm that exchanges nutrients and shields them from disease. They unlock minerals trapped in the soil, increase water retention, and produce natural growth hormones that, stimulate stronger root systems and foliage. In practical terms, this means fewer pest problems, better drought tolerance, and, higher yields with no additional cost. Even small applications of this liquid can regenerate depleted garden beds, You can even scale it up easily. Farmers use similar microbial brews to restore pastures and revive dead land, really. The principle remains the same. Feed the microbes and they'll feed the plants. That's how nature intended it to work, honestly. This shift isn't just about personal gardens anymore. All over the world, fertilizer costs have absolutely skyrocketed, and agricultural runoff just keeps polluting our rivers and oceans. Every single bag of synthetic fertilizer is, tied to fossil fuels and industrial waste. As we move deeper into the year 2025, gardeners and homesteaders everywhere are honestly rediscovering these old methods. They're simple, they work, and best of all, they're infinitely renewable. It's not really about going backward. It's about reclaiming the wisdom that worked for centuries, long before modern shortcuts nearly destroyed our soil ecosystems. Once you make your first batch and see the results, you'll realize that the health of your plants depends not on the price of a product, but on the life in your soil. If you've been relying on store-bought fertilizers, this is your wake-up call. You don't need them, and your garden will thank you for quitting. The DIY BioBoost is proof that the most powerful fertilizer on Earth can be made from what you already have, for free. It restores life to the soil, builds resilience, and produces stronger, healthier plants without chemicals or dependency. Start small, 1 bucket, 1 week, 1 batch. Then watch how fast your garden responds. Once you see the difference, there's no going back. You'll understand why I ditched store-bought fertilizers for good, and why you should too. If this guide helped you reconnect with real soil health, subscribe to Botanical Bliss for more deep-dive insights into regenerative growing, natural plant care, and backyard sustainability. Share this with others who are ready to ditch the dependency and rediscover the power of true living soil. Your garden and the planet will be better for it.